So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kelly Goodman Schaefer. I'm the president and CEO of the Bedford County Chamber of Commerce, and we are delighted to have Secretary Russell Redding from the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture. Sorry, just got a ping on my phone from the FFA clubs that they're trying to log on. So hopefully they're able to join us in a second here. But we are delighted to be able to have our Government It's Your Business Speaker Series, which is online right now, obviously because of COVID-19, and we're just very happy to have Secretary Redding with us. Before we get to our program, we'd like to welcome some of our special guests. We have Tanya Clark from the office of Senator Langerholtz, Tammy Hess from the office of Representative Jesse Topper, Betty Slayton from BCDA, Deborah Orner, the Vice President of the Cambria Region Chamber, and we are going to hopefully have in a couple minutes Scott Myers, Chair of the Chamber's Agribusiness Committee and his Bedford FFA chapter. We also have some members of the Chamber's Government Affairs Committee and the Bedford County Farm Bureau who partners with us on all of our agriculture and government affairs programs. Just a quick introduction of Secretary Redding. Secretary Redding was nominated by Governor Tom Wolf to serve as the 26th Secretary of Agriculture for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in January of 2015, confirmed by the Senate in May of that year. He is the former Dean of the School of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences at Delaware Valley College. Secretary Redding has extensive experience as a public service servant, having spent more than 20 years serving Pennsylvania in Harrisburg and Washington, D.C., previously serving as the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture Secretary under Governor Rendell. He's a graduate of Penn State with a BS in Agriculture Education, MS in Agriculture and Extension Education, and also a graduate of the Agribusiness Executive Program. A native of Pennsylvania, he grew up on his family's dairy farm and spent time as a dairy farm operator. Currently serves as chair of the USDA Advisory Committee on Biotechnology and 21st Century Agriculture, which I know our FFA students will be glad to hear about. He and his wife, Nina, have two sons, and reside in the Gettysburg area where the family is active in the community, their church, and the local 4-H club. And we're always delighted to have Secretary Redding, a great friend to Bedford County, and I'm delighted to turn the program over to him. Thank you, Secretary.
Hey, Kelly, thank you. Thanks for the kind introduction. It is nice to be with you virtually. I would love to be there in person and get back into Bedford County and see many of the folks that I see the names on the screen, but just to say thank you to each of you for what you've done, continue to do in support of agriculture. I've said this before, but to have a chamber with an interest in ag, standing committee structure around agriculture, speaks volumes for where you see the industry fitting in terms of business, in terms of the future of the county, and the important work that it takes to steward that at many, many levels. Certainly. On the farms and in the schools and local governments, and a note of thanks, by the way, to our county commissioners and their support, to Betty Slayton, a good friend, and the EDC, but also to our House and Senate members, as well as in Congress. I mean, everybody has a role to play in support of and in the furtherance of agriculture, but you are among a very select group of chambers in Pennsylvania that have agriculture as really a cornerstone of that work. So it's always good to be with you and support the industry. As we are living, these are extraordinary times. I've said it many times. I said it before COVID, and certainly has become even more important in the last 8 months. They are challenging for all of us. We've all adapted. We're all sort of, searching for that relevance. We're searching for some equilibrium between, those things that instinctively are part of our work and relationship building that are interrupted. At the same time, making sure that we keep our eye on the ball, and in terms of our local economy, and certainly for us here in the department, agriculture is a part of that. As challenging as they are, I also always point out that there are opportunities. What we have seen over the last 8 months, I don't think there's anybody here, who doesn't understand a lot better sort of food access, the importance of making sure that our production agriculture system matches that need that we have, for food access. And pre-COVID, half of our meals were were consumed outside of the home and the other half inside. We all know what happened in March and April. That pendulum swung all the way to consumption at home. And in that move, I think there was a rediscovery in so many ways. I think society certainly has a new appreciation for food and agriculture, and that's not just at the macro level. I think that also comes down to the local, very personal level as well. But we've been reminded of agriculture's role in both our state and national security, and understanding that access to food and agriculture is a foundation of a civil society. And we have witnessed that over the last 8 months. We also have, through this time, COVID's revealed things, and we know some of those are good and some not so. On the agriculture side, the awareness of food that I mentioned, the complexities of our marketplace, as somebody who has spent a lifetime in agriculture trying to advocate for it, guide it, encourage it across the state, we've learned a lot. The number of people who are food insecure. I mean, who would have guessed in a state of 13 million people that we've had 15.5 million individuals served at food banks across Pennsylvania since the spring. That's a duplicated number, but just think about the number for a moment. It's nearly 2 million more people than we have in the entire Commonwealth have had to access our local and charitable food system. But you cannot have a charitable food system without a food system that's charitable. The food bank is simply the outlet. What's in that food bank comes from those who are in ag and the many dimensions that we see in Bedford County and across the state. And final point, we also have seen how fragile this farm economy is. It's in a better place today because of many, many interventions, but it's also fragile. Good thing, I think agriculture's responded. They're amazingly adaptable people, and that is a good thing for 2020 for sure, because they've had to embrace so much change. Let me take a moment and just, since as a chamber, you understand this is a business, you get that. But as I often point out, and I think I've shared before, so if this is a repeat, I apologize, but I also, having a background in education, repetition is an important element of learning. Back in, when I first came into the department, returning from Del Val, it was important for us to have a conversation about what is agriculture. I think most of us can point to the farm and the barn and understand that that is, but that didn't fully capture what we were seeing both in the economic statistics and on our landscape, or where the jobs and the workforce needed to be focused. So we partnered with the Team Pennsylvania Foundation and the Fox School of Business and conducted an economic impact study that looked at both the definition of what is agriculture, but also to quantify the impact. So we looked at what it is and who is it. And I think there are two really important components to the impact study. That, again, may seem obvious to Bedford County, but you're not normal in the regard of looking at agriculture as an economic enterprise. You do get it. So this may seem like an odd question, but it was an important one for us to ask. The takeaway of that study was 18% of our gross state product in Pennsylvania is from food and agriculture. It's 580,000 jobs, just about $136 billion of economic activity every year. Half of those jobs are direct, the other half are induced or indirect, but still an important part of the economy here in the state. And I think for the very first time, we have a handle on the significance of agriculture. That's important because you can't really talk about what it needs until you understand what it is. And that became part of our plan as we both headed into the study, but also coming out of it. The study confirmed a couple of things: that agriculture has grown to become an industry where the futures markets and the farmers markets are equally important to both Pennsylvania and the world. And what happens globally certainly has an impact what happens in Bedford County in Pennsylvania. We also see that 50% of the global population is under the age of 30, including 90% of the population of emerging and developing nations. So when you think about our exports, think about that, the need for us to both satisfy a domestic population, but as we also know, exports are critical to the economy. They're important, obviously, to Bedford and agriculture as an industry. But we're also seeing, a lot of dichotomies. We have folks who desire to grow and buy local and promote local, alongside the recognition that 95% of the available stomachs are outside the United States of America. And we have to recognize that, both in terms of our business planning, but also where I see agriculture in the state. But our diversity is really the key to the economy, ag economy in the state, and no different than for the Bedford County region. That diversity of your portfolio, your businesses, is equally important. But we have a lot of diversity, and I'm proud of that. When I look around Pennsylvania, some of the agricultural sectors are as old as our Commonwealth. The hardwoods industry dates back to the founding of our country and our state. At the same time, you've got these evolving and emerging industries around controlled environment agriculture. That's the hydroponics. It's the leafy green businesses that you're seeing that are a result of both consumer interest and demand, but also not moving food 3,000 miles across that country. Generationally, farms that are startup, I've met many of them who are very first in their family and their generation to farm, but also I've been on farms that are 10th generation. And when you see that span of experience and history, you understand that agriculture is both important to our past. I think it's critical to our future as well. But continued growth in organic, continued growth in urban centers, and making sure that we're, as we look at agriculture, that it's not zip code specific. It really is zip code neutral as well. As a chamber, I'll just note, the skilled workforce. I know we've got, FFA and ag science, the FFA chapters and the ag science programs are with us today, and just say again, how fortunate you are. We only have 156 of these programs across the state, and you've got 3 of them in the one county. I think that really is an important statement, because we can spend a lot of time talking about the future of agriculture and the workforce and what it needs, but you live that, you're programmed for it, your administrators and school boards have recognized the importance of workforce and being very intentional about training and providing those skills and competencies that we know are needed to respond, but they're also reflective back to the economic impact study of what is out there in terms of jobs and opportunities. So we can spend more time talking about that. Our projections are around 75,000 new jobs or replacement jobs in agriculture in the next 10 years. Each time I say it, I think it's a low number just because of what I see happening, and the number of operations that have come online in the last several years are pressing that churn number pretty effectively. But we need a skilled workforce. I know that the skills that we're looking for in the industry are also the skills that other industries desire, right? The good communication skills, the life skills, but also the technology. You can go to most sectors and they're going to give you that same sort of response. So for agriculture, if the goal is to grow it here in PA, we've got to compete, and competing with those other industries for the talent is critical. But again, having the 3 FFA chapters and the 3 ag science programs in the state give you a really important head start. One of the things that we focused on was looking at the K through 8 as a place that we ought to be talking about career pathways and the jobs. As a place for meaningful employment in Pennsylvania. But starting that early, that was part of what we wanted to do through the Pennsylvania Farm Bill and support for the farm to school grants in the ag and youth development grants. And I know Bedford CTE was one of those that received one of those grants. But the apprenticeship model, Pennsylvania's worked on 3 of those, one in the ag equipment technicians, as well as dairy grazing and vegetable production, and we're supportive of a 4th that is a national program. It's in the landscape industry and the management program. So the apprenticeships become also really, really important. A couple of final points. We as an industry find ourselves at the intersection of some of the most important issues of our time. They're in the environmental stewardship, they're in food nutrition, they're health related, they're looking at even the human development side. I think there's the COVID, if there's a silver lining, has revealed, as I noted, a lot, but it's also brought home this issue of being able to feed ourselves, being aware of what's local, being engaged in community and the civic side of our business. And we speak a lot about the science, but I've often described agriculture as this balance between civics and science. The science piece we adopt, we apply. The civics is the real challenge, right? Having people appreciate what it is that their local communities look like, but also the civic engagement required by those who are in ag to talk about agriculture. And as somebody who believes strongly in the industry as an education background, the civics lessons that we have learned as a society are directly correlate to sort of the functioning of our community as well. You could say the same for agriculture. But a couple of points just on, there are 4 sort of imperatives. When I look at the future of ag, I see 4 imperatives that are really important. One is the high level of production will be achieved with minimal negative impacts on the environment, and the impacts will be shorter term and reversible. Number 2, the high quality produce and animal proteins will be available with reduced and manageable risk for food safety pathogens and any type of chemical adulterants. Third, a wide variety of food products are available, enabling consumers to select healthy foods and create a varied and interesting diet. And fourth, the productivity and sustainability are sufficient that the U.S. food system can share that abundance with other groups, both at home and around the world, and particularly those who are less fortunate. On this final point, last point was around trade. I mean, I've shared some of the details with you, but you see it in Bedford County. I see it in Pennsylvania, just how important the trade activity is. We've heard that national debate and dialogue with China, what's happened in the UK, and the USMCA, the Canadian and Mexico, the new NAFTA as it's termed. All of that is important to point out as part of our work. On the COVID front, I've mentioned a couple of things. I'll just sort of underscore. There are many lessons learned. We could talk about them here as well today, but just to say that I think we've, as a nation, particularly in the U.S. Department of Agriculture, that coronavirus food assistance program has been critical. $275 million going to agriculture in the state. That's before you put any of the other programs in there. The food assistance that has come from the USDA and our state. One of the things the state legislature and governor did was to take money out of the Federal CARES Act and set it aside for food and ag. $50 million was set aside. That was one of the largest amounts of any state in the nation, by the way. But it allows to do the food security, the rescue product that would have been dumped or discarded. It allowed us to look at some of these supply chain interruptions that we had. And it really was important to, I think, both from a policy standpoint, but also allow us to meet those multiple needs that we had of feeding people, but also keeping this ag economy moving and really working well. again, we can talk more about those aspects if you'd like. I guess my final point would be just on the animal health side. I've mentioned some of the imperatives, but one thing that becomes clear is that this human and animal health disease issue is really critical. Nearly 60% of the human diseases and 75% of the emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic, meaning they can go back and forth between animal and human. So being on alert, if we've learned anything in the last 7 months, that disease travels quickly. We're an animal agriculture state with both production and processing and distribution here. So what happens in this animal space is really critical. So there's a lot of emphasis on the biosecurity becomes important. I mentioned the Farm Bill earlier, but one of the historic actions last year, not this past budget, one before, was the Pennsylvania Farm Bill, and having $24 million to invest in small meat processing and in business development, looking at youth, as I mentioned, dairy processing. All of that investment is doing exactly what we would hoped it would do, and that is to spawn both interest in ag, investments in agriculture, but it allows us to really build from there. So I'll end where I began, with a simple thank you to the Bedford County Chamber, to the folks who are every day, in partnership with us, both at the farms and the community and the chamber, all of the business that support it. But I think, keeping it here, growing it here, is a collective challenge, as we know. And I think that's the kind of discussion that I always enjoy having about what we can do better, where we've made investments that people would like to see us enhance, or quite frankly, areas that just haven't been maybe paid as much attention to that we need to. So Kelly, I'll stop there again and just say thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Secretary Redding. I do have a couple of questions that have come in. One is from Betty Slayton from BCDA, asking if you could share some more about the work that you're doing with the USDA Committee on Biotechnology. Biotechnology is an area of interest here in Bedford County in terms of recruiting businesses. Obviously, we have Lampire here, and would love to have others like it.
Yeah, no, Betty, thank you, and good afternoon to you as well. So the Biotechnology Advisory Committee for the USDA, just a little bit of history, sort of dates back several administrations, several secretaries of agriculture, and really began with some of the debates that were occurring around genetically engineered products in the food system and the acceptance of that, the regulatory structure around genetically engineered products. And the work has evolved to include a couple of things. In my work, specifically with the committee, was focused on two things. One, this regulatory structure. How do you approve the new products that are genetically engineered? I mean, that's not an easy thing to do in the U.S. because it gets wrapped into both the public policy, the public perceptions, the international trade. So improving that regulatory structure was one of the goals. Two, and probably not surprising to you, is that we continue to have this debate both at the consumer level with the food system, but to make it very grassroots, we have continued issues between those producers who are organic or non-GMO focused, and those producers who are using genetically engineered crops. And that's been part of the work of trying to make sure that in the USDA, again, keeping in mind trying to help the USDA navigate this, was part of the effort. And so bringing together, a pretty diverse coalition and guiding them through. There's a lot of other areas in the issues in that biotechnology space, but they were sort of the two charges that the Secretary of Ag gave us to address.
Thank you. Another question involves the dairy industry. Could you talk a little bit about how the dairy industry, maybe in your view, has coped through the COVID-19 crisis? They were already in a tough spot with milk prices being low and so forth. And then to have the schools shut down and restaurants shut down. Can you talk a little bit about where you feel the dairy industry stands and what it looks like for that industry going forward?
Yeah, thank you. And again, I would say, we entered 2020, and again, to the dairy industry in a pretty good space, and a lot of optimism about sort of what the industry uh, was going to, finally be able to achieve in terms of decent pricing, predictability. Well, we all know what happened 90 days in. That sure fell apart. Um, so I think in the early months, the March, April, May, I think it was in a complete free fall. Be very honest about it. And as a result of that, you had milk being dumped. You had this dynamic playing out that you mentioned, um, Kelly, about the schools and where people were consuming and what they were consuming. What's fascinating is that pendulum swung all the way out uh, in the spring, and it sort of came back to sort of center. Uh, the milk sales, fluid milk sales actually increased substantially in the spring because more milk was being consumed, more milk was being purchased for home consumption, more cooking occurring at home. So you could picture that, and that has been part of the challenge of the dairy industry the last 5 years, and really disturbing trend of dairy consumption. That seemed to stabilize, and actually to the positive became a really important uh, you know change that we witness. Not to say that it's sort of back where it needs to be, but I will just tell you that the milk consumption has continued to increase, dairy product consumption continued to increase. Our international sales resumed. About 17% of our total dairy production in the United States goes international. So when those markets, and you saw them come back on a little sooner than we did in terms of restaurant trades and stuff. So to give you a sort of a shorter answer, I guess, dairy is at the moment, I think, looking at a pretty good year in 2020. It has some headwinds heading into 2021, but our hope is that production continues to stabilize, consumption continues to increase, and international sales continue. What has been a long-standing need has been magnified, and that is we do need additional processing. Right, that was one of the issues that the Dairy Futures Commission had noted. It was one of the things that we had identified with our original dairy study. Senator Corman last year launched the Dairy Futures Commission. And again, to underscore, you do need additional investments in processing, not just in fluid milk processing, although I think that's something that probably had less appeal just because of the decline in fluid milk consumption heading into COVID. But I think there are processors now who say, okay, maybe this was the wake-up call that we needed to reinvest. And in addition to that, sort of additional dairy products like the specialty cheeses that have continued to climb in consumption and appeal.
Can you talk a little bit about the beer, wine, whiskey industry and how you see that growing in Pennsylvania? We have our first beer brewer here in Bedford County now, and we expect a whiskey distiller to open next year. Can you talk about the impact of that industry across the state?
I think it's a great development. Certainly, it started with the grapes and the wine industry, but certainly into the beer and the craft beer industry. If you look at participation in our farm show in the craft beer segment, I mean, just look at the number of entries that come from around the state, and they're really great wines and great beers. And I think the same could be true with the whiskey and the distilled products, further distilled products. So I think it's both an opportunity for us to use the resources we have, the land resources, the food resources, to do some really creative agritourism opportunities for Pennsylvania, tap right into the consumer appeal of both all of the spirits. So I look at it at multiple levels, where it really is good for Pennsylvania. I put the footnote to it that I would hope that we continue to develop the grains that support the distillers. And I think that's happening in Pennsylvania, but it's not corresponding to the growth of the actual products. So I think there's a grain opportunity here that we can rediscover some of those heritage grains to support the malt industry, the beverage industry. And I would hope to see greater Pennsylvania preferred identity of these products as well.
Okay, we have a question from our agribusiness chair, Scott Myers, who's on with his FFA chapter.
Great.
Has there been any discussion of providing low interest loans or grants for individuals who would like to be a productive member of the food chain, whether it is production or processing, like hydroponic operations or butcherers, processors?
Yes. And I would say, there's a couple of things. One, the farm bill that I mentioned has, and I hope that our budget negotiations are again fruitful, that our farm bill programs are funded. But in there, the small meat processing grant is a great example. $500,000 invested the last time. We did 15 different projects, to help, those existing processors expand to become federally approved in the HACCP program. So that's just one example. We did the same with dairy. We've got direct investments in the fresh food financing initiative. So we should open that conversation up, Scott, to talk more specifically about what you would like to see. But I think it's been one of the important reminders of our investments have to be, the processing sectors, small meats, dairy processing, et cetera. And the other, just to point out in terms of production agriculture, there's also part of the farm bill was the new and beginning farmer tax credit that Senator Vogel spearheaded. So I don't know if that's where your focus or attention is, but just to point out that has really been a good development to see the transition, farm transition is part of our overall strategy.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Scott.
Everyone on the call is welcome to turn on your cameras and your mics if you'd like to ask questions. Do have a couple more that came out of our committee. Going back to the topic of agritourism, and you're talking about like farm tours and hay rides and things like that. A lot of that obviously is shut down right now due to COVID, but can you talk about the importance of some limited liability for farmers who would like to maybe diversify a little bit and make their farms available to some agritourism?
Yeah, thank you. And again, a great question that ties in with a couple of the themes today. House Bill 1348 is the bill. It's Representative Gleim from Cumberland County is the prime sponsor of that. It is awaiting third and final consideration in the House before it goes over to the Senate. Kelly, to your point, it's the liability question. Right, is really the reason to address the legislatively address it is to you've got to confront this issue of limited liability. So that's been the hang up on getting it done, just because of the concerns about the limiting that liability if there's egregious acts, obviously need to be addressed. But our hope is, the short answer, our hope is that the House can get this done and over to the Senate. I don't know if it'll happen in the sine die session here in the remaining days of November, but if not, hopefully can pick that up in January when the legislature reconvenes. But it's all about the liability protection.
Obviously, legislators are going to be very busy over the next few weeks on the state budget. Can you talk about where agriculture stands in your mind with the 5/12 budget and the negotiations that are currently going on?
Yeah, thank you. And I think the 512 budget, just to point out, that's historic. Everybody understands where we were in May, June, and the free fall that I mentioned earlier, and where the economy was. I think, we deferred the tax revenue until, July. And so it took a lot of, the guesswork out of our state budget. And I think it was the right decision, but it gave us a 5/12 budget, which basically, funded, part of the year. Agriculture did okay. I'll just say that part of the negotiations was making sure that our higher education was funded for the entire 12-month period. For us, that includes Penn State, includes the Cooperative Extension, includes the University of Pennsylvania Vet School, but it also was K-12 education was also funded and supported. So I think that was good. The Department of Agriculture's budget, was for the 5/12 was good, but we also found ourselves not being able to spend much of the 5/12 on the grant side, particularly because of the uncertainty. And the agreement was that we would be able to free that up as soon as we had the 7/12 budget. So the 5 plus 7 equals 12. We've got another week, 10 days in here where the legislature will have to, and the governor will have to address what to do in the 7/12. But we have a good budget for ag, good being our Animal Health Diagnostic Commission is funded. The grant programs that I've mentioned as part of our farm bill are funded in the 5/12s, can be released if we get additional funding in the 7/12s. So to Mr. Myers' point of, the farm to school, the ag and youth grants, the small meat processors, and all of those grants are part of the 7/12 budget as well. So we're hopeful. I mean, I'm hopeful we end up in, for all things considered, end up in a really good place that we can address both the business needs, the education workforce needs, but also close some of the gaps that we identified as part of the COVID in terms of the food processing and particularly in our food security and food access concerns.
We did just have a question come in via email about CWD. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing with that topic? Obviously, hunting is a really important issue in Pennsylvania, but here in Bedford County for sure.
Yeah, thank you. The CWD issue has been probably the most challenging of animal health issues in recent time, to be very, very honest about it. We understand, our history as a Commonwealth and the joy that is comes from hunting and being able to be outdoors and to watch an industry develop over the last 20 years in the captive cervid industry. And there was a time when, I'm sure the person asking the question knows this, but when we took on the responsibility for the captive industry from the Game Commission 20 years ago, there were just a handful of deer farms. And now we've got 1,200 deer farms across Pennsylvania. So that has, been, in our minds, and we certainly want to try to continue to protect that. But this really difficult issue of the chronic wasting disease has been with us since 1967, but it's been escalating in prevalence here the last couple of years. Bedford, Blair, and Huntington are the epicenter of CWD positives in Pennsylvania. So we had a decision to make. We've been managing it sort of across the state and trying to quarantine and then indemnify and remove herds. What we realized is with 90% of the positives coming out of the 3 counties, there's no way that you can sustain that model where you simply go in and quarantine and then euthanize and try to compensate. So we did the captive quarantine zone, creating a zone of activity for those 3 counties, hopefully allowing several things to occur. One, continuation of the hunting and the outdoor spirit in those counties generally, both with the wild as well as the captive, but also trying to create a model where those who are in the business of the deer farms and doing all the right things have some opportunity to continue to do that while restricted. That is a better business model and some continuity of operations for those farms than a terminal enterprise. And so we've struggled with that, to be very upfront with you. But we hope that what we've created here with our state veterinarians and others is this structure where we find that sort of balance between protecting public health and safety in our wild as well as captive herds, at the same time not force an operator of these farms, servant farms, to be in a terminal enterprise.
Again, I would invite anybody on the call, if they have any questions, you're welcome to turn on your camera and your microphone and ask them, or if you want to raise your hand, I can try to help you unmute. I think you all have the power to do that. I was very interested to hear you say about the importance of starting workforce development in the elementary school ages. We started a 5th grade career fair, agriculture career fair,
Nice.
last year with the tremendous help of Mr. Meyer's FFA chapter and local businesses. I'm sorry that lost some momentum because of the COVID situation, but that's one of the things that we hope to bring back. What would your recommendations be for the chamber and for other organizations in terms of reaching those elementary age students and starting that workforce development, planting those?
Well, yeah, I applaud you if you've taken that step into the 5th grade. I think it's perfect. You know, we have recognized that when you look at career pathways, of the 28 high priority occupations for agriculture, only 9 have a defined career pathway, right? So it's making a lot of assumptions about what it is somebody either understands or both in terms of the industry, but also what's available. So pulling that down into the middle elementary years has proven to be critical. And we've seen results of that around the state. And it's the way we talk about food and ag and the environment, right? It's not just about the agriculture proper. Back to my Fox School of Business discussion, is that what we realized is that for many people, the food is where they identify. Food in terms of food science, it could be food prep, it could be food production, it could be food distribution, all of those are food components, and they don't think about them necessarily as agriculture. But then you take it to the conservation of the environment and where people are thinking about climate and the changing, environments that we live in. So advice would be approaching, our school administrators and school boards to look at food, ag, and natural resources. And there's some really great curriculum through the Department of Education. There's some work of the Ag Ed Excellence Commission in this regard, but having that conversation early, planting that seed early, talking about where food intersects and agriculture intersects with them is really the key to sparking an interest in this industry called agriculture and the food system. I would argue that we have a better chance now, given what's happened with COVID and that awareness, than we did before. And even on the virtual format, was on a call this morning in Philadelphia, starting a new CTE program around agriculture, the environment, and the food. And it's really interesting, that they recognize that what's occurred is that there's more interest in the food system discussion. So anyhow, just a point to say, I think with the challenge we have of the retirements, when we see the growth opportunities that are occurring, when we see the level of science that's required, we see the need for forklift operators and truck drivers and the technologists and go on, is we cannot leave that to chance. It's been my point. It may work, but I know that hope is good, but hope's not a plan. And whether you're talking about the farm succession planning, or you're talking about someone in small meat processing or the biotechnology, the more intentional we can be, the better. So if you can get that in the K through 8, and then if you're lucky to be in a county like Bedford, where you've got a very defined career pathway for the ag science program, that's great. But it ought to be part of our intentional work. To build that out and build the public interest in agriculture and the food system.
How important is it when you're talking about agriculture careers to also weave in elements of entrepreneurism? Because when you're talking about farm succession and things like that, you have to know more than your crops and your cows and your animals. You also have to, like you alluded to earlier, be able to market that product and be able to find pathways to sell it.
No, it is a great reminder that you can begin be really good at the science. You can be good at the technical aspects, but there's also an entrepreneurial spirit, right? Of just understanding the business acumen and being able to do basic planning, business planning, and so I think that is part and parcel to success. Is either being able to develop the entrepreneurial skills and competencies, or aligning with those who have those skills and competencies who can help you, right? I think the Ag Business Development Center we created as part of the Farm Bill that I mentioned earlier is a great resource for that, tying in agriculture into the small business development centers around the state, tying in with cooperative extension and the work that they're doing in entrepreneurial, the degree development and short courses. All of that is, Kelly, is really part of, I think, the planning for the intentionality of this business, and whatever we can do to both raise that awareness of need, but also support it then by the program side is really, really helpful. So a chamber, I think you guys are progressive. You're looking at that. Maybe that's an area in the entrepreneurial spirit you have, and how do you translate the entrepreneurial needs the food ag system would be a really important discussion for you. You mentioned the agritourism, the wine industry, the spirits industry. I think that's the kind of entrepreneurial spirit, right? Yep. That I think, quite frankly, we are in a really good place in ag. I speak of diversity, but I say it all the time. We are not mono agriculture. We're not monoculture agriculture, right? We have major corridors that give us access. We've got 1,100 farmers markets. We've got 13 million people and 50 million in the neighborhood, right? You just think about the opportunities that we have for public access to people who want to know where their food's coming from. And that is a really important differentiator for Pennsylvania agriculture, is that we can add the value. We can both do that as product, but we can also retail that, both experience and present that to a public which has a really strong desire to know us. And I think that's a great opportunity for us. But you can't do it if you're not good at the product and you're not good at that entrepreneurial side.
Again, last chance for folks to ask questions. Before you go, Secretary Redding, I would like to give you a chance to talk just briefly about what's going to happen with the farm show this year and what you see as far as county fairs and any state funding that they might be able to expect this year.
Yeah, thank you. And again, like the rest of our lives, farm show is going online. We really felt it was important to make that decision early. For those who follow Farm Show, you know that there's a lot of investments made in the summer. Particularly, our fairs are the farm team, if you will, for Farm Show, and both the youth and the animals and the gateway to the state competition is through our county fairs. In the absence of that this year, we made some decisions to not do the livestock competitive events because of complications of movement and trying to live within the restrictions of size of crowds and stuff. But most important was we did not want to forfeit a year where I think agriculture has demonstrated time and again, it is essential, it is life-sustaining. What can we do to keep that engagement there with the public and the agricultural community? So We are planning a full virtual farm show. There will be a few live events at the farm show, more for purposes of the social media and media to push that out statewide. But we'll have a full schedule that's being planned right now. The dates are the same. It'll run Saturday to Saturday. I think it's January 9th to the 16th. And we'll start every day as we've done at the farm show of years past with the national anthem. We've got a number of culinary to the points earlier today about PA foods and PA preferred and cooking and culinary. That's going to be, part of our farm show. We've got panel discussions on a range of topics from both they're all contemporary, thinking about our ag education in our STEM fields, being able to highlight that. But I would just ask all who are, have been to the farm show to tune in during that week. If you've been a participant in the past, take a look at the competitive exhibits. That some of those are open for you still. But please enjoy the farm show. We do have an opportunity. We've been reminded that we can take the farm show to all four corners of Pennsylvania, and we can take it around the world through a virtual format. We unfortunately will not be able to use all five senses, right? You won't be able to touch and feel and smell and taste, but you can see and you can listen. Two of those are critical. And I think having that opportunity in this 2021 as a bridge to the 2022 farm show. Final, just on the fairs, there is a piece of pending legislation that would allow the fairs to receive funding for the 2021 year, even if they didn't have a show, understanding they had a lot of expense in the planning for it. That is pending in the Senate, and we're hopeful that that bill passes, again, like the agritourism will pass here in the sine die session, so we can support our fairs and put them in a good position. Obviously, like the Bedford Fair, we want to see them have a wonderful 2021 year, but they need a bridge to get there as well.
For sure. Thank you, Secretary Redding, for your time today. Mr. Myers, is there anything you'd like to say before we close it out today? Oops. Hold on. Can you unmute? There you go.
Now maybe I can talk. Secretary Russ, Redding, we really appreciate you coming out and appreciate all the support for agriculture and our students and youth that we've had here in the county, and look forward to working with everybody in the future as well. Hopefully we can get this coronavirus out of our state and kind of return to normal.
Yeah, I'm with you. As I've said many times, I mean, everything I'm doing, we get the job done, but it feels a bit sterile.
Yep.
Right. It just 80% of our communication is nonverbal and not being able to see you. I see you, but I really don't see you. Right. Because I can't read the body language. I can see names. So the sooner we can get back to, looking each other in the eye and shaking the hand, all for it. But just let me say thank you again, Kelly, to the chamber, to each of the members, but also those who are supportive of agriculture and those who are in the business of. Really appreciate what you're doing as a chamber to support them, but also those frontline who are making it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Normally, our Secretary of Agriculture lunch begins with the FFA ceremony, and we love that so much. And so we can't wait to invite you back post-pandemic era and be able to do that again. So thank you, Secretary Redding, for being with us and for all of your work on behalf of Pennsylvania Agriculture. Thank you again to the Bedford County Farm Bureau, our dignitaries, Government Affairs Committee members and friends, and especially our FFA chapters that we really love to work with throughout the year. A reminder that at 2:30, we do have an online town hall coming up with DCNR Secretary Cindy Adams-Dunn. So for those of you who'd like to come back, we'll see you then. And until next time, be safe, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
A wonderful Thanksgiving. Thank you.
You too. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.